Hi, everybody. You are in the right place. We're just allowing some time for people to enter the Zoom room. We thank you so much for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll start introducing everybody now. Hi, and welcome to Politics in Prose Live. My name is Beth Wong. I'm an event manager at PNP. And thank you so much for joining us here to celebrate the release of two new and very excellent works of speculative fiction, A River Called Time by Courttia Newland and Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon, moderated today by Denise Hamilton. At any time during our event today, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase copies of this afternoon's books from PNP's website. Your purchases obviously come to the store at a really difficult time for small businesses across the country. In addition to growing your own speculative fiction library, a book sale from PNP means that we at the store are able to keep bringing you content like this, content that we are just so proud of. You can ask our authors a question by submitting it to the Q&A box, the button for which can be found at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, to make sure that our authors and moderators sees it. I will waste no more time in getting to the main event. Courtia Newland is the author of 7 books, including A River Called Time, The Gospel According to Cain, and his much-lauded debut, The Scholar. In 2016, he was awarded the Roland Rees Bursary for playwriting, and as a screenwriter, he's written 2 episodes of the Steve McQueen BBC series, Small Acts. Cosmogramma is his forthcoming book. Rivers Solomon writes about life in the margins where they are much at home. In addition to appearing on the Stonewall Honor List and winning a Firecracker Award, Solomon's debut novel, An Unkindness of Ghosts, was a finalist for a Lambda, a Hurston Wright, and otherwise formerly Tiptree, and a Locus Award. Solomon's second book, The Deep, based on the Hugo-nominated song by the W.D. Diggs-fronted hip-hop group Clipping, was the winner of the 2020 Lambda Award and shortlisted for a Nebula, Locus, Hugo, Ignyte, Brooklyn Library Literary, British Fantasy, and World Fantasy Award. Their next novel, Sorrowland, is out in May 2021. A refugee of the transatlantic slave trade, Solomon was born on Turtle Island, but currently resides in an archipelago off the west coast of the Eurasian continent. And finally, our moderator today, Denise Hamilton, is the author of 7 crime novels and the editor of Speculative Los Angeles. She edited the best-selling Los Angeles Noir anthology, which includes an Edgar Award-winning story, and Los Angeles Noir 2, The Classics. Hamilton is a former LA Times journalist, a Fulbright scholar, and an Edgar Award finalist. Her next novel is a work of speculative fiction set in Los Angeles. I'm so happy to have all 3 authors with us this afternoon. I believe we're going to start with a reading, and River Solomon will begin with their work.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's so glad to have you here. And yeah, thank you for being a part of this. So I'm going to read from Sorrowland, which comes out on the 4th of May in the US and the 6th of May in the UK. And I'm going to read to you from the beginning. The child gushed out from twixt Vern's legs, ragged and smelling of salt. Slight he was and feeble as a promise. He felt in her palms a great wilderness. Such a tender thing as he could never be parsed fully by the likes of her. Had she more strength, she'd have limped to the river and drowned him. It'd be a gentler end than the one the fiend had in mind. Vern leaned against the trunk of a loblolly and pressed the child naked and limp to her chest. His trembling lips lay right where the heart-shaped charm of a locket would be if she'd ever had a locket. So that's how it's going to be, win me over with lip wibbles, she asked. And though she was not one to capitulate to bids for love, this baby had a way about him that most did not. There was courage in his relentless neediness. He would not be reasoned out of his demands. Vern reached for the towel next to her. With what gentleness she could muster, and it wasn't enough to fill a thimble, she dragged rough Terry over the baby's mucky skin. Well, well, she said, cautiously impressed. Look at you. Vern's nystagmus and reluctant low vision were especially troublesome in the waning light, but when she pulled her baby close, her partial blindness had little impact. She could see him full on. He was smaller than most newborns she'd had occasion to handle and had inherited neither her albinism nor her husband Sherman's yellow bowness. His skin was dark, dark, and Vern found it hard to believe that the African ancestry that begat such a hue had ever once been disrupted by whiteness. Lucy had been that dark. Viscous cries gurgled up from his throat, but died quickly on the bed of Vern's skin. Her flesh was his hovel, and he was coming to a quick peace with it. The child was young yet, but his bones were annals of lifetimes of knowledge. He understood that heat and the smell of milk were to be clung to, or else. And that's the beginning of Sorrowland.
Wow, that's so amazing. Thank you for that, Rivers. That was really fantastic stuff. I am going to read from the opening chapter of A River Called Tyre. We were talking about this earlier, and saying I was saying I like to try and read from as different points as possible, but the opening chapter for both of us is a place where we don't have to say what happens in the book. We can just read it. So this is a very convoluted premise, this book. So rather than me do that, I'm just going to do the same thing. I lack courage, obviously. I was going to go for it with a different part of the book, but I was like, okay, let me just do the start. Void. Hum. 360 degrees expansion, pervading known and unknown matter. Breath. Existence. Him. The first time he was struck by a spontaneous Nambula, Marcus Denny was 8 years old. Feet pushing hard on pedals, body leaning against handlebars, the wheels of the bike ahead glistening with sunlight. His attention was seized, and for a moment he saw the heavens in that shimmering rotation. He couldn't take his eyes away. There was pain in the center of his forehead. He was falling from his bike before he knew it. He must have blacked out, because the next thing he was lying on the pavement, elbows and knees raw, the bike a resting animal, a yard or so from where he'd fallen. His friend stood over him. Tashari, Karis, Nesta. Marcus let them wrench him to his feet, limping back to his fallen metal steed, waving away their concern, their insistence he looked pale. Soon they rode in unison again, creaking gears and turning wheels, a random symphony beneath them. They stopped outside rusting gates propped open with fallen masonry. Flakes of orange made the once grand entrance look diseased. Grass and weeds stood as high as their waists. A slight breeze made the strands rustle like a whisper of ghosts. They sat on their bikes, staring at blighted metal. Silent. Nesta edged forward, thin bicycle tire nudging the gate. He rolled over crumbled stones, standing and stamping on the pedals to gain more power until he was over the obstruction. Inside. They followed, one after another. Marcus, Karis, and Tashari, the skinniest child always last, lifting his chin towards graffitied walls, brow arched, fearful. The building was huge, not compared to the Ark, of course, though it towered above their heads 4 stories high. They rode through warped frames of wooden doors into the main entrance hall, craning their necks to look at the roof. Fallen glass left the dusty brown sky exposed. Their school picture books showed chandeliers and birds wheeling overhead, but the boys saw neither. They got used to being alone, speeding up and down once polished marble floors, performing wheelies and long skids, creating miniature desert storms. When they grew bored, they explored alone. Marcus rode past closed ticket booths and parades of empty shops, to the platforms where sleek grand trains once stood. He left his bike against a marble bench and jumped onto the tracks amongst long grass. Some of the weeds were green strands that looked like wheat. He lay against cool steel, trying to imagine what it must have been like. The olden days. He closed his eyes. Thank you.
All right, so that gives you a flavor of the 2 different styles. I thought I would just say a little bit about each book, just to kind of orient readers, especially Rivers, because your book is not out until May. So, and the beginning of your book is so primal and elemental. We feel like it's, the beginning of creation. In many ways it is, certainly for Vern, who is 15 years old when she escapes a Black separatist compound called the Blessed Acres of Cain and gives birth in the woods. And it turns out she gives birth to 2 babies and raises them in the woods for 4 years, excuse me. Always one step ahead of this horrific kind of mythical creature called the Fiend. And then eventually Vern decides, for the sake of her kids, that she's going to try to move back and integrate with civilization. But while in the woods, Vern's body is morphing and changing, transforming in kind of what appear to be non-human ways. The book is gothic, it's horror, it's a tale of transformation. It's really an amazing story that is elemental and mythic in its own way, and yet it is so focused on this one character. We feel, and through your descriptions, we feel and hear and see everything that Vern does. And what I am curious about is, did the character of Vern come to you all at once, or was it kind of a slow accretion of details about who Vern was and what Vern's situation was? And when did you feel that you had enough material to actually start writing, or did Vern emerge in the writing process?
Vern is definitely one of those characters who came fully formed. It's just like a real person that kind of appears in your head with a strong personality, beliefs, history. And I had been trying to write this book for a couple of years, but I hadn't really figured her out, and it just never happened. And then the first scene, the scene that I read, which has remained largely unchanged, just came to me. And I think it came to me because she came to me. And that word you used, primal, that very raw, I guess, sort of stripped away of niceties and stuff, because she has to be. I mean, she's kind of living wild now and is away from everything that she's ever known.
She's a child herself. She's 15 years old.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And what was so fascinating to me was how you kind of had, I'm sure in the writing, you had to strip yourself of everything you knew, because Vern in many ways was an elemental herself who had been raised in such a restrictive environment that she didn't understand the world outside at all. So how did you crawl into that space of almost sensory deprivation or knowledge deprivation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there's so many things that make up our reality that are assumptions that we have just because we've always been raised with them. But she doesn't have any of those. She's been raised in a very specific, sheltered environment. And I think giving her this setting of starting in the woods really has sort of allowed me to write what that might be like. Like the idea of, I mean, she's giving birth to children, but she's also becoming born herself. And so I think focusing on the realities of survival, there's a bit in the book and it's just like, she has to take it moment by moment. What keeps her alive from this moment to the next? And that's her focus, and everything else kind of has to be incidental at this point. And I also just kind of tuned in on, there's a whole genre of books, I feel like, especially in the US, of the kind of the kid in the woods, stripped of everything else, away from society. How do you get by? And I guess really leaning into that, and, what would it look like doing that if you're a mother and also a child, and just sinking into the setting of the woods and the dirt, and the animalness of it all.
And that would be hard enough if that was all that Verne was dealing with. But no, there's monsters in the wood, right?
Yeah.
And did the fiend, was that also something that came immediately, or?
No, the fiend was my natural inclination as a writer is just a kind of day in the life style, I guess. And then I thought, I mean, for example, I could read all day about, someone's like basic survival, or just drinking tea. I enjoy that kind of thing. But I thought, I don't know, I also think there's something that gets to the heart of humanness when we're put in such extreme situations. I added the fiend later when I thought, maybe this is a little too easy. And I mean, actually, I think that's something that still exists in the book. I think Verne is kind of, I mean, as one will find when they read the book, kind of super, she's not like, she's not like everyone else. And so she needed intense challenges, I guess, to be fully formed.
And the fiend ends up only being one of the monsters that Verne has to face. Courttia, I was trying to figure out a 1 or 2 sentence description of your book, and it's so hard because there's so much going on. There's 3 timelines for starters, but I guess to boil it down, it's set in an alternate futuristic London, where the privileged live inside this gigantic ark, which is basically like a concrete dome that has been erected around much of the city. It also takes place in a world where the slave trade didn't happen, colonization didn't happen, and an African cosmology is the dominant one in this universe. There's also astral travel. There are, it's a fascinating story, and I love the alternate timelines and just the whole idea of it. And so I was really shocked to read in another interview that you had editors who had discouraged you from writing this book, who told you to cut the Africa themes and the astral projection themes and basically stick to urban fiction. Which I guess is you had written before. So can you tell us what your reaction was to this kind of narrow thinking, and how did you retain your faith in this novel despite all of this? And tell us a bit about how the book came to be published, because it's a book that was germinating for almost 2 decades. You started writing in 2002.
Yeah, the whole first part of A River Called Time I wrote between 2002 to 2004. And that was the part that I took to my then editor. I was a published author. I'd published, I think published 2 or 3 novels at that time. And they were, one was a crime fiction novel, and the other 2 were I don't know, like urban fiction. And I mean that geographically rather than ethnically, you know what I mean? And so I started out with that stuff. So I presented the first part 1 of A River Called Time to my editor, thinking, hey, I think I've really got something here. I've been bashing away at this. I went away, disappeared for a couple of years, and I came back like, here I am at the whole, have this thing. And he said, he said it's the best thing you've ever written, but I really think you should stick to urban fiction. And my first reaction was like, just kind of like, huh? What? How did those 2 things go together? and then like my second reaction was like, this is everything that people talk about, and say that this is what happens to Black writers. And up until that point, I've been having quite a charmed life with publishing. I got published at 23, got my next book out within a couple of years, my next book out in a couple of years, and then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, the barrier was it was literally like hitting a barrier at full speed and being like, what? Hold on, what? Like, didn't we have these conversations when I said I'm not going to stick to one genre or anything? Hadn't we talked about this for the span of like 3 books? So my first reaction was, okay, cool, I just take it somewhere else then. And I went off and I tried to take it somewhere else. And basically everywhere I took it, people were just like, what are you doing? And like I said, this was 2002. So this was like, although we knew that Afrofuturism was happening, African futurism was happening, nobody else seemed to know, like in terms of the mainstream society. So within us in the diaspora, we all had an understanding of what it was. We'd all read the books, we'd all listened to the music, we'd all seen the artworks, you know, really, we understood. But when you were talking to the mainstream industry, they were just like, what are you doing? In fact, at one point in time, I wrote another novel after that, and I'd written that my characters are listening to Jay Dilla. And my agent at the time said to me, you really need to take this stuff out because no one knows who you're talking about. So it was that level, okay? And so I'm quite stubborn. My dad always said this to me, you're really stubborn, Courttia. So like, I just was like, I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to do more of it. And I'm going to get deeper and I'm going to hone this stuff. Like this stuff, there's something in it. I know there's something in this. And I carried on with this until about, I think until about 2006, 2007. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'd run out of Arts Council funding. I need to, you know, work on another book. And so then I put it in the drawer and I carried on with different books, and I did that.
Then what happened?
Oh, sorry. So I did that. I published 3 other books. I published Music for the Off Key, which is like a surrealist working class Black British fiction. And then I published a book of blues, which is me trying to be straight. I discovered surrealism, and I was trying to be like, okay, I'm just gonna be like just like normal, go back to normality. I couldn't go back. I'd walk through the door. It's too late. So even in that, there's a couple of stories that are just really off key. A woman who every time her boyfriend smokes, she blows out the smoke and stuff like that. It's just like crazy. But I tried to keep it. Okay, I'm just gonna do realism. And then I did The Gospel of Kwanzaa Kane, which was picked up by Akashic in 2013. And at that point, I actually was like, you know what? I'm not even going to talk to England anymore. I'm going straight to, I'd met Johnny at the National Black Writers Conference in Brooklyn. I'm just going to talk to Johnny. You know, I'm not even going to talk to anyone in the UK. I just can't, you know? So I did that. And then I went to a conference in, I think 2018. I went to a conference in Geneva to teach. Just went out there to teach. And Hannah Knowles at Canongate came up to me and said, you know, I'd like to talk to you. And at the time in my head, the little voice was just like, yeah, sure you do, whatever. I mean, it's mad. By that time, I was just like, whatever, sure. But yeah, I was, okay, cool. I take your card, whatever else, and went off. And then when I got back to London, she sent me an email. I really, really, really want to talk to you. I was like, okay, well, what about? And I heard you got a sci-fi novel. No, I don't. Yes, you do. I have something I want to write. I've got a sci-fi novel in the future. And she was like, no. You've got something. Crystal Mahay Morgan, who wasn't my agent at the time, but now is. So she told me that you've got a sci-fi novel. I was like, well, I've got this thing that I wrote in 2002. And she was like, no, that's it. That's the one. Please send it to me. I was like, okay, cool. And then she read it and liked it. And then she said, can you do the rest? You know, can you write the rest? So I wrote the rest in 2019, just after Small Axe. I'd finished doing Small Axe. Small Axe was being shot, and I was like, okay, I've got a little bit of time, window of time. I'm going to finish the book, and I got to it. Yeah.
Before the pandemic and
just before the pandemic, thank God. I just did it. I delivered it basically in January, and then February everything went crazy. So.
And yet there's all sorts of echoes of not Brexit exactly, but you know, police brutality, and even though there was no slavery in this world and colonialism, there's still bad people and people who are out for themselves and all of that. Yeah. So I like how you kind of weave in echoes of things that were happening in the world.
Yeah. There's people with face masks, and there's a sickness, and there's all this stuff, which I was a bit, when it started coming around, like as 2020 developed, I was just like, oh my God, this is nuts. I wrote this in 2002. But yeah, I think these things are cyclical, unfortunately, for Black people in our lives. You know, they just, we've been dealing with this stuff for centuries. So everyone's like, oh, you looked into the future, but no, you don't look into the future. It comes around again and again, and we go through the same stuff, and that's what's so tiring, you know. And yeah, you just, if you write about those things, they remain prevalent, you know. You kind of, it looks like you got your finger on the pulse, but you're just talking about the things that keep happening, you know.
Yeah,
And
just the latest iteration of it in this timeline. Yeah. Well, I was wondering, you know, if you were thinking about, even before COVID, how much humanity has messed up this timeline, and that was something that made you kind of wish or hope to, and kind of to write an imaginary timeline where things might have been a little better, but still messed up in their own way with the arc and all of that.
I really wanted to talk about class, and I really wanted to do that forensically. And I thought, if I somehow remove the race from the equation, people could really look at it. But what I wanted to do after that was put it back, you know, without any spoilers. I wanted to have a portion of the book where it comes back, and then that would make it more stark. And I've been likening it to, you know, when you go to the doctors and they think you've got an allergy, and they say, okay, so you're not going to eat this food, you're not going to eat this food, we're going to take it away, and then we're going to reintroduce it bit by bit, one by one. We're going to see what ails you. This is how I wanted to look at race. I did want to talk about race, but I wanted to talk about it from the position of removing it and then reintroducing it, basically.
Yeah, I just loved it. And I loved, it seems like you must have done a lot of research into astral projection and the whole cosmologies that you wrote about. How did you go about doing that so that you could have the verisimilitude to write about it in fiction?
Just a deep dive into everything, basically. Every TV show I could watch, every film I could watch, every book I could read. I read John S. Matibi, African Religions and Philosophy. I read the Metu Netta. I read that, like, that was my Bible, basically, for the whole thing. I read books on astral projection written by European writers. There was a lot of books from the the 19th century written on astral projection. Who knew? You know, and I started going into it. There's all this stuff. I looked at some quantum physics as well, because I think there are parallels. Even though one person has said to me that I should exchange African cosmology for quantum physics, I didn't want to do that. But this was in order to sell the book. But what I did want to do was include it. And so I included that. I looked at that. I looked at how things corresponded. There's a book by Dr. Reginald Crosley, called The Voodoo Quantum Leap. Oh man, that was just, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was like, this is amazing. He writes really well. You know, it's a beautiful book. So I read everything I could get my hands on from all over the place, you know, because I wanted to do, although African cosmology was kind of dominant, it didn't mean that Christianity still exists, Islam still exists, you know, and it was about weaving everything together rather than negating anyone or anything. Yeah.
I think the publishers were so wrong to even suggest that to you about quantum physics, because there's so many books about quantum physics, whereas I think there's a hunger for new themes and new ideas in science fiction and speculative fiction. And that's why, your books are so interesting, because they take you into a world that is fresh. There's a freshness to the writing. And I think the publishers are kind of like movie executives. They don't know. They're chasing what they think is the next big thing, but they don't know, and they're kind of afraid to take a chance. And except for Johnny Temple at Akashic Book.
Yeah, he's of course very savvy. Yeah, he knows what's what, and he's more of a on the ground level. He sees what's going on, and he hears what people are talking about, and he's much more in the communities, than a lot of other publishers I've encountered.
Well, Akashic Books also published your first book, Rivers. So
I just want to share in the Johnny love, the Akashic love.
Of course. Well,
and I love their motto, reverse gentrification of the literary world, as well. Rivers, you put your character Vern through so much. That character just every page there's a new obstacle and a new torment. And there are a lot of villains, and there are both individual human villains and more institutional ones, the police, the local civic governments, scientific these potentially doing experiments on people. But in the end, I feel that despite all the horrors in the book, that it's also a book about love, and it's a book about finding family.
Yes.
So I'm just curious how you balance those two poles of, the Gothic horror with the very kind of, the supernatural horror, with the idea of a very kind of humanistic finding your family, which is not your birth family, it's the family you cobble together and call a family.
Yeah, I'm somewhat known for being a brutal writer or something, or writing about quite a lot of brutal things. But, I think a lot of the things I write about aren't that far removed from the realities that many people face, and with a layer of the fantastical, and, the idea that this is a novel. It's, why am I telling this story and not a different story? I'm telling this story because, things got a little wild and out of control, whatever. So there's that. And I guess for me, I can't tell a story that doesn't have, I hesitate to use the word redemption, but it's like, I don't want to get to the end of a book and think, well, what the fuck's the point? Or like, well, is this, it's not worth living. So I have to have that element of family, of humor, even in really ridiculous situations. There's a whole section of the book as well that's kind of randomly about philosophy and stuff, and queer theory, and and all of that. And it's like, these are the things, the pieces that make up our lives, those little bits that make it all worthwhile, and that there is beauty in the world. There is beauty despite all of the horrors. It's like, this is what we're fighting for. And something that's different about Sorrowland than my previous two works, I always write about Black people. I always write about the diaspora, and it's try to zero in on kind of different expressions of diaspora and different geographies. But Sorrowland is the first book that's very contemporary. It's set, more or less in our world. It references, the FBI, for example, and real histories that happened in the US, as opposed to sort of being somewhat based on them, but like on a spaceship. So in doing that, I think I could really lean into the questions like, why am I fighting still? And not to say that Werner's anything like me at all, but I could sort of look at my own life and my own look around me, like and a lot of it came out as this, I guess, reclamation of love and life, and it is worth the faff, and as hard as it is.
The mother love felt very true to me. There was nothing sentimental about it. There were times Vern was dismissive of the twins and very much tough love. And I'm tired. I don't want to read to you, or I don't want to play with you. Go play by the river. And
I can relate. Go play by the river, man.
I felt that was very true to life too. So the mixture of, the Gothic and the horror, and then these very primal relationships between the individuals. I just love how you did that. And even the Fiend, there's a very complicated relationship between Vern and the Fiend. And I was wondering how you came to that decision without giving too many spoilers away.
That is always the struggle with these kinds of events. Yeah, so I think something that I never wanted to forget, and it was easy to forget, and I had to remind myself not to forget, was Vern's youth. And so that like definitely came in, especially with the parenting stuff. Like, it's not necessarily fun, raising children when when you're just coming into yourself and you have all of these, ideas. And I mean, obviously parenting is a struggle at the best of times and in the best of circumstances, but she didn't even have those. And I think what I wanted to get at with her and with her relationships is a kind of intense honesty, and not being afraid to, like, usually, I mean, obviously writing always involves a layer of filter, filtering out the bad at the very least and keeping the good. But I wanted to eliminate as much filter as possible of those, passing thoughts that are like not your best self, or your desires that are, desires that you wish you didn't have or want to have. And I think trying to include those in, and especially because of Vern's youth, she would be less filtered. I could really give those relationships their intensity. And as far as Vern's complex relationship with the fiend, and I think this is something that she remarks on. So the place that she grew up, the Blessed Acres of Cain, the Black separatist commune / definitely has some very abuses of power that we associate with cults vibe. One thing that she says is the main thing that drew people there was loneliness. And that's, I think, something that she sees that in other people and is judgmental, but doesn't maybe quite see that in herself, that loneliness can be at the heart of a lot of our sort of less good decisions. So yeah.
Courttia, well, this is a question really for both of you. What do you want your readers to come away with after reading your books, in terms of what they're thinking and feeling and seeing? How do you want them to be changed by that experience?
I mean, I'm not sure I believe in the capacity of like literature to actually change people. I know it's meant to. You're meant to be able to walk in someone else's shoes and all of those things. I don't know. I if anything, the most I can hope for, I suppose, is that people think. They have a moment to think about things and think about different perspectives. I think. I mean, I think for me, essentially, River is a novel about truth. It's about should we tell the truth? When should we tell the truth? What is the cost of not telling the truth? And I just feel like Marcus is a character that like many of us, he's had the truth kind of like socially beaten out of him. He's undergone some really harrowing experiences when he was a kid, when he tried to tell the truth, when he tried to face up to something, and it didn't work for him. It scared the hell out of him, actually, and it scarred him, and these kind of formative things that scar you as a child. So his default position is to conform, at least a little bit, and then conform a little bit more, then conform a little bit more, until he gets to the point where it's actually harming people. And I suppose in answer to your question, I wanted people to understand how this can happen to other people, because I'm quite judgmental myself about things like that. I'm like, sell out, and they do 40 pieces of silver and all this stuff. But in this book, I was forced to reevaluate that a little bit and say to myself, okay, so this is a character who does those things. How do those people get there? What happens to them? How do you, as a writer, sometimes you have to have empathy for things that, like Rivers was talking about, the things that you might not wholly agree with. So I wanted people to understand his journey and how he got there, but also at the end of the book, maybe offer some redemption. That it is okay to stand up and be brave and to say something. And it's just you finding your way of doing that. And I think in every parallel in the book, a character is wrestling with the question, like, should they tell the truth or shouldn't they tell the truth? How far should you go in telling the truth? Some people go too far.
And what's it going to cost you if you
what's it going to cost
tell
you
the
if you
truth?
do tell the truth? Yeah. And what's going to cost you if you go too far? You can go too far and lose something of yourself as well, you know, in that sense. So it's finding that balance.
One of the minor characters, I guess, was Marcus's mother, who sacrificed and wanted everything for him, which meant that he would get into the Ark. That was her goal and his goal. But the cost of that would be that she would never see him again, because once you get on that train and travel to the inside of the Ark, you never see the outside again. But you are gonna. It's like Oz, right? It's the Golden City, the Emerald City. And yet, once he gets there, he realizes, wait, everything that I sacrificed for, and my poor mother sacrificed for, now I'm here, and it's not what I thought at all.
Yeah. The wizard is just a man, you know. That's what he realizes, you know, and that's what really, it almost breaks him. It's getting to the point when you see him years later where he's on the verge of being broken by that realization. Because what did I do this for? And I think that came out of looking at my grandparents and my parents, and I would ask them as a kid, like, why did you come here? Why did you leave there to come here? Like, what the hell was that about? You know, like, you had this and you had that. And a lot of the times they didn't really have a coherent answer. We don't know. Yeah, we came for money. And then I was like, well, why didn't you go back when all this stuff happened? You know? So I think that was, in a way, me trying to articulate that journey that they made, you know, the sacrifices that they made for us, you know. And in some ways we have got a lot of privilege, you know. In some ways I have gone further than my parents and grandparents could have imagined, you know, but also we're having to deal with so much, you know, simultaneously. So in its essence, I suppose the book is
so interesting. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for so many things, really.
Well, it's an allegory for being Black British. I think ultimately, you know,
and
it's about that experience, and
what you gain, what you give up, how you stay true to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rivers, what about you? I don't want necessarily. I don't think people are going to be changed, but what do you want them to think or feel or see or come away with after?
I think I want people to challenge their assumptions about history and about what we think of as the truth. I mean, everything. I was actually internally, I don't know if I actually was nodding my head a lot to everything Courttia was saying about the truth, but specifically Vern has grown up in a place where the truth has been very mangled, right? I mean, and there's a thread of so much that's that is true. One of the things that she says early on in the book is that, you know, this idea that, you know, everything that pastor, that's both her husband and the leader of this, you know, is true, you know, but it's also wrong. So, you know, how do you navigate that, and how thinking about sort of all of our upbringings and all of the social hierarchies that we've internalized, and how do we fight them, and how do we, you know, things that looked true to me or seemed true 5 years ago don't seem true to me now. How can you trust yourself? How do you trust what people tell you and what's all around you? And Vern is this character who has an intense, questioning, challenging spirit, who lives for the idea of this tussle, this fight. And I think that I want people to also try to sort of embrace that tussle, that, you know, what is real? What is the truth? How can I dig deeper? How can I, you know, question and not just settle for easy answers or what I've always been told or what I always thought was true. And I hope that, you know, people can take that spirit. And I hope that there's enough of questioning of things that people have accepted previously, but now they have a bit more of a question mark about it in their head. So
can I ask a question?
I think both your books do that. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in there. I just had a question, like for Rivers actually. Does that make your storytelling does it make it complicated to compose a narrative when you're not being absolute in what the character is meant to feel or believe or any of those things? Do you find it difficult, or does that somehow make things easier?
I don't think it makes it difficult. I mean, I think there's also this sense in which the truth isn't everything, right? There's sometimes it is just about your beliefs and your values. I think that that's something that people don't think about, that this idea of an objective truth and you know, is very sacred. But I do think you know, Vern, even as she has all these questions, she also has very strong instincts and beliefs that, you know, carry her forward through the narrative.
Yeah, makes sense.
Shall we take some audience questions? We have some here. I don't know if you all can see them. This was a little while ago, but Rivers is nodding knowingly. I'm curious if they also had the double down approach with folks who don't understand, or a different approach.
I don't fully remember. I've been nodding my head knowingly a lot because Courttia has been saying lots of great things. But if the question is generally about sort of challenges in publishing, is maybe that's what I'm, do you two agree with that that's what this is about? Oh wait, someone, I think they meant about people telling you. I'm still not sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of
editorial process.
Oh, editorial process. Oh, sure. I mean, my first book was published with Akashic, with Johnny. Prior to that, it had been rejected a lot, and I felt like meeting Johnny, meeting all of the Akashic team, like I felt like really seen and understood. There weren't that many changes between the manuscript that I handed in and the one that ended up being published. My second book is kind of a different story altogether, because it was because it was intellectual property, because this was based on a song, and I was, you know, almost work for hire. You know, there was a sense that, you know, it was collaborative, so I didn't have as much, you know, preciousness. Oh, this is mine, and that, you know, and I don't know. I haven't actually. I think I have pushed back against things like for this book, but I think they were all like, when I, you know, if a challenge was posed to me and I said, no, actually, I'm right. You know, they were very accepting. So yeah, I feel very like lucky and blessed, to use that word. Hashtag humble and blessed, I suppose. So yeah.
Someone wants to know, Courttia, what are the names again of the books that you cited about African cosmology?
So I read, the main ones were the Metu Netta, and there's like volumes 1 and 2. The Voodoo Quantum Leap by Dr. Reginald Crosley. That's Crossley. And John S. Matibi, that's MBTITIBI, I think. I'm not sure. John S. Matibi, he's really, really well known, and that was African Religions and Philosophy. And I think those 3 are the kind of pillars of my understanding of African cosmology. I had to learn a lot. I had to unlearn a lot as well. I had to just like really forget everything I knew. And I knew nothing at the beginning. Like, I mean, I knew the rudiments, you know, but when I read those books, I was like, whoa, I know nothing, you know. And I'm still learning about a lot of things, you know. I really want to, even though I'm of Caribbean heritage, Barbados and Jamaican in terms of like Caribbean cosmology and folklore and stuff. I'm removed, so I'm gonna go do a deep dive into that for a project as well. And like 9 nights, people are always saying to us,
Another
9 nights.
project.
Yeah, there are many projects, but yeah, the Jamaicans are always saying to us in Britain, like, you know, you guys don't do 9 nights properly. You don't do 9 nights like how we do 9 nights in Jamaica.
Question for Rivers: was Caneland based on any group in particular or a composite of them? And also, the questioner says, I just want to say how much I adored Sorrowland, and I think Rivers is a beautiful storyteller. And they have not yet read Courttia's book, but plan to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for those kind words. It's definitely a composite of one thing that I was exploring basically was in the Black diaspora in the US, this idea of trying to find our liberation through sort of these various religious sects that have sort of come to be, and some, you know, to various successes and you know, and I don't want to be slanderous because I know many people who are part of these different groups and stuff. So I don't want to, you know, to be compared to Caneland isn't necessarily a compliment. But so I don't, you know, want people to get the impression that, you know, I'm saying that these groups are all bad. But one of them that was a big inspiration was the Black Israelites. But there are lots of Black, I feel like in the cult conversation, Black people are often sort of left out. And even though, you know, anyone can be sort of manipulated, you know, into these kinds of things. And, you know, I like to let people know, for example, like, I'm blanking on the details, Kool-Aid cult, for example, that many of the people were Black people, for example, and that the leader of, yes, thank you, Jim. And I was in, you know, one of his speaking points was about Black liberation, and he was very, you know, anti-segregation and all of these things. And so, yeah, that's a bit about it.
Question for Courttia. Let's see, were there any parts of the book you needed to update to reflect more recent events as time went by? And do you wish that you could have included any of the more recent dialogue/topics of 2020? And last question, the clipped phrases and partial sentences, how did you decide on that style for your narrator?
So were there any parts of the book I had to update? No, I was lucky enough that I'd only written part 1. So anything that I wanted to put in, I could put in the later parts as well, particularly part 3. And I didn't know I was going to do part 3 like that. I knew part 3 was going to have, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to spoil it, but I knew part 3 was going to do a particular thing. But when I got there, I was like, oh man, I could write about the time that I'm in right now. I've never done that in a book before. Like, it's actually happening right now. And I'm going to write it on a day-by-day basis, everything that's happening right this minute as I'm writing. And that was like huge because I knew it was going to come out. So that was a benefit. What I had to update was just my style a little bit. You know, I changed so much as a writer between 2002 and 2019. Like, so I was like, oh my gosh, but I've got to update this, but I can't go too far. I can't go to where I really am now. I have to keep it within the pocket of where I was then as well, because then they'll bump, right? The two, like this part will not gel with this part because they'll be so poles apart. So I had to find a nice, comfortable, younger me style. And there's all kinds of younger me stuff in there. I was like, oh my God, it's like looking at photos of yourself, you know, from like way back and be like, oh my God, what did I really have that hairstyle, or was I wearing those glasses and this, that, and the other? So the second part of the question was
the clipped phrases.
The clip phrases. Yeah. All of that kind of thing just comes naturally to me. I think in terms of like, I just go with what I feel rather than trying to say, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to use clip phrases. I just go with where I feel that sentences should stop. I think it was something I was playing with a lot more at that time too. So I adopted it and worked on it a little bit more for the later parts 2 and onwards, you know. I think probably I use longer sentences now, years later. But also it's just the voice of the character. I always try and go with how I feel like the character speaks in my head and just try to follow that and step back, and I don't want to be dictating to them how they should speak, because then it's going to go wrong. So yeah, it's just instinct, really.
All right, and then another question for Courttia. Would you say this book takes issues of racial and national identity formation as originally presented in your works, The Scholar and Within, to an Afrofuturistic level?
Yes, I do. I think it goes beyond that a little bit. But my thing when I wrote this book was like, all right, I'm going to do a book about what we call, I shouldn't do that, I was talking about not doing that earlier, but I'm going to do a book about Mandem, you know, like, which is like guys from a working class Black British background, and I'm going to do a book about them being in sci-fi, because that hasn't been done yet, you know what I mean? Where I take the guys that were in The Scholar, these like kind of like urban fiction books, and I put them into sci-fi, like, but wholeheartedly, or put them into speculative fiction. And that's what I was really excited about. So yeah, some of those themes are the same things, but also I could explore a little bit more of their humanity as well. And like, again, when you get to part 3, what happens to Nestor as well, like the possibility of who these people could become later in their lives, because in The Scholar, they're 17 and you never see them again. So you never get to see what they're like when they're 30. You know, I always think about what would Tupac have been like at 40? You know what I mean? Like, just we just never get to see those things, you know? So, you know, I wanted to look at that with some of the other characters. You know, you get the chance to see them not just as kids, but as grown men.
I really appreciated getting to see those characters as adults.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the last question we're going to take is, because we're running out of time, is what fantasy authors have inspired both of you?
Rivers, you want to? Sorry, I wasn't doing that to put you in it, but like.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, and most of my biggest influences are probably not in fantasy, and you know, like I feel really influenced by like the Harlem Renaissance writers. I feel very influenced by poetry and also like religious expression and stuff. So that's where you can kind of get this idea of mythology and fantasy and stuff.
What poets?
I love Gwendolyn Brooks. I love Langston Hughes. I love this contemporary poet Kiki Petrosino, and yeah. I'm trying to think of fantasy. I can think of some sci-fi. Like, I really like Ursula Le Guin. I think Octavia Butler is so weird and interesting, and it blows my mind. I say this whenever I talk about her, that she was like publishing those books when she was like, it's like wild to me, like the level of weirdness and intensity in those books that she was writing as a Black writer, and they were publishing them, and people were reading them, and it's like, what? I love it. So, yeah.
I'm the same. I'm exactly the same with all of those writers. Apart from the ones I don't know, but all the Gwendolyn Brooks. I don't want to claim everything, you know. You don't even know who they are. But there's I mean, I'm blanking on his name now, but he's an Akashic writer, and he wrote this book, Every Boy Should Have a Man. You know who I'm talking about, and his name's gone from my head. Sorry, I always know what this guy's name is, and then just now it just went blank. But Every Boy Should Have a Man. That is one of the craziest. I said to Johnny when I read it, I was like, I can't believe someone's done this. This is just so brilliant. I'm a fan. I'd love to sit down and have a drink with that guy. Just like chat with him for hours, if you'd allow it. Yeah, I really like his work. I like Anne Petrie, The Street, or Anne Petrie. I don't know if I ever pronounced her name. It's another name I haven't heard much, but I love that novel. That really inspired me as a young man. L. Lovelace sort. There's a British writer called Peter Kalu. He did some science fiction books in the 90s, like Black Star Line, I think was one of them. I really love his work. An English writer called Rupert Thompson. He's the guy that flipped me over into the surreal. Yeah, he did a book called The Insult. Percival Everett, one of my favorite writers ever. Colson Whitehead. Yeah, just so many people.
So Preston Allen is your man.
Preston Allen, yes, thank you so much. Yeah, every boy should have a man. Everyone, check that out, man. It's just bizarre, but brilliant as well.
Well, Rivers, you said something about, the Harlem Renaissance, and I do feel like we're seeing a kind of flowering or renaissance right now with speculative fiction, especially writers of color and diverse writers of all kinds writing speculative fiction. So I do feel perhaps, hopefully this will be looked back upon as an era when there was this amazing flowering, despite the fact that, you also have James Patterson, owning half the shelves on the bookstores and the big bestsellers. But it's also, I think, a time when independent voices are finally being heard and marginalized voices. And I'm so happy to hear that. So I think we're out of time now. I want to thank you both for coming. And I think Politics and Prose is going to come back on any second and tell us that,
yes,
that we're out of time. There you are.
Right. Thank you all so much. This conversation has been so fun and gorgeous. And I can attest personally that these books are excellent. The link again is in the chat to purchase them from Politics and Prose. We thank you all for being here with us. Again, your patronage is what helps us bring you these kinds of programs. And without the book sales to support them, we have a lot more trouble bringing them into your homes. But I'm so happy that we had the crowd that we did today for Rivers, for Courttia, and Denise, thank you so much for moderating. Everybody out there, stay well read, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.